Their chorus book. Brother Jack picked me out four choruses, so we'll do all four choruses right now. So, something beautiful, number 70. Number 70. Something beautiful, something good. All my confusion, he understood. All I needed to offer him was brokenness and strife, but he made something beautiful of my life. Let's do it one more time, all right? Something beautiful, something good. All my confusion, he understood. All I had to offer him was brokenness and strife, but he made something beautiful of my life. All right. Number 63, Windows of Heaven Are Open. I like this song. I always like this song. Number 63. The windows of heaven are open. The blessings are flowing tonight. There's joy, joy, joy in my heart since Jesus made everything right. I gave him my old tattered garments. He gave me a robe of pure white. I'm feasting on manna from heaven, and that's why I'm happy. That's why I'm happy. That's why I'm happy tonight. All right, that's a good song too. One more back, 60 Jack has down here. So, oh, this little light of mine. Yep, number 60. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Hide it under a bushel, no, I'm gonna let it shine. Hide it under a bushel, no, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Won't let Satan it out. I'm gonna let it shine. Won't let Satan it out. I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Let it shine all over Flint. I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine all over Flint. I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Let it shine till Jesus comes. I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine till Jesus comes. I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. That was a good one too. Well, all of them are good. Another page back, 656. Cheer up, you saints of God. Yep, these are all good ones. Number 56. Cheer up, you saints of God. There's nothing to worry about. Nothing to make you feel afraid. Nothing to make you doubt. Remember, Jesus never fails, so why not trust him and shout? You'll be sorry you worried it all tomorrow morning. All right. Thank you, Brother Jack. Those are all four good ones.
I think Jack picked a high one for you, too. So it's not just Patty that gets upset. They were. Open your Bibles, the Habakkuk, chapter 1. I would like to finish chapter 1. It's a very different book, as we said last week, in that he's the only prophet that actually questions God when God gives him a prophecy to make. And the prophecy that God gives him about the Babylonians and Israel and the captivity becomes a great burden to him. He says in verse 1, the burden which Habakkuk, the prophet, did see. Now I want to start in verse 12 and finish chapter 1, and we'll kind of review a little bit. In verse 12, again, the prophet's talking to God. He said, art thou not for everlasting, O Lord my God, mine Holy One? We shall not die, O Lord, hast thou ordained from the judgment, and Almighty God, thou hast established them for correction. Thou art of purer eyes than to behold evil. So God cannot really see evil, and cannot look on the iniquity. Wherefore lookest thou upon whom? Upon them that thou deal treacherously. Holdest my tongue when the wicked devoureth the man that is more righteous than he. So he said, Israel's more righteous than Babylon, than the Chaldeans, and I can't believe you're using them. And that's the second time he's questioning God. He's already questioned him once. And makest men as fishes of the sea, as creeping things, and have no ruler over them. So he said the Babylonians, the Chaldeans, treat their enemy like just going fishing. They catch them, throw them out, they're cruel. Take all of them with the angle, they catch them with their net, they gather them in their drag, therefore they rejoice and are glad. So he said they rejoiced in causing great discomfort. Therefore thy sacrifice of their net, and burn incense unto their drag, because their portion is fat, and their meat is plenteous. Shall they therefore empty their net, and spare not continually to slay the nations? So the prophet continually asks God, and you might say he does something here that we see a lot today, rephrasing a question. You ask a question, you don't get the answer you want, you rephrase it, you try to get the answer you want, and if sometimes you can rephrase it again before the president or Jan Psaki or whatever walks away. That's the same thing that's happening here. Now, we talked about Habakkuk being the doubting Thomas, because it's almost like the whole time, even though he knows what God has said, even though God is holy, he just can't believe God would use somebody worse than the Jews to judge the Jews. He's concerned more with solving the problem than delivering the people. And his prophecy, in verses 1 through 11, his prophecy coincides with Jeremiah's. Babylon was not yet a threat, not on the rise at the moment, and they just couldn't see it. They couldn't see down the road how this particular problem could be. And we could say that with today's geopolitical stuff. How can China be a threat to us halfway around the world? How can Afghanistan be a threat to us? But they are. I mean, that's where Osama bin Laden was at, and in Afghanistan and stuff. And these things we don't understand, but God sees them. Now, we talked about the other prophets, Hosea and Amos. When they prophesied to the nation of Israel. It's northern tribes and southern. Then in Micah, Jeremiah, Isaiah, Joel, Zephaniah, and Habakkuk were basically talking to the Jews, to Judah, the southern kingdom. Jonah and Nahum were written to the Assyrians. And I'm going to share all these guys are related before it's over with tonight. Obadiah wrote to the Edomites. And Malachi was written to the southern kingdom, the city of Jerusalem. Now, as I said last week, I never had anybody yet, ever, even in this past week, come up to me and said, Habakkuk is my favorite prophet. I can tell you this verse out of Habakkuk that I like. That doesn't happen. His background, we said, was very scant. He may have been a Levite. But he was around, and things that changed Babylon, Egypt, and the world power Syrian there was the Battle of Carchemish. And Carchemish was a Hittite city. located in Syria, and it became a turning point. One of those things in history, that things changed right directly after that. I heard somebody, I think it was Oliver North, saying the other day that World War II was a Cargamish moment for the world, because when it came out of that, there was only one superpower in the United States. And we beat the Germans to death, and they surrendered. And we bombed with the atom bomb Japan. So we brought them down violently. And he said, after the last two wars we won, and then they changed the name of the Department of War to the Department of Defense, which he said proves that we're on defense. So things happen. Pharaoh Necho Kargamish decided that he could defeat the Babylonians and stop their westward rise, and it didn't work. He got beat there. The balance of power in the Middle East changed, and God began to deal with Habakkuk and his prophecies. Now, a twofold problem here was he's asking, why did God allow the wicked Babylonians, Chaldeans, why did he allow this wickedness to continue among his people, and why would he allow a people that's worse than his people, than God's people, to be their correctors, we could say. And he took the matter to God, which the other prophets did, and he asked why. And basically God said, when I finish with the Israel, I'll finish with Babylon. Now, we talk about Babylon, we talk about the captivity, we talk about Daniel being there, the three Hebrew boys, Nebuchadnezzar, the Belshazzar. You got to understand, that was a 70-year period of history. 70 years. The fact that we dwell on it so much shows you the power of the Cargamish of the battle that happened and the change of power. Now, he was troubled because he could not understand it. The Hebrew word for burden, we said, was massa, which means a heavy burden or a heavy load. The spiritually just weighed him down. We could say it kept him up at night, gave him heartburn or whatever we want to call it. But it made him just, it was such a heavy thing. He didn't really want to go and give such a bad report that God was going to do such judgments. Now, we don't understand a lot of things God does either. You know, we say sometimes wish God would come end this world and it's all over with, but God has his plan, his time. And God's science gets misunderstood. We said Sunday by the scoffers as to being that there is no God. These are an excuse. If God was real and God was true, he would have already learned this. But what it teaches us, the long-suffering of God, is we have to trust by faith God and his word. Now, we're just like these people here, and that sin seems to go on, generation to generation, and every generation push the limits of the last generation, it seems like. That's what it seems. Now, remember, in the days of Noah, the world was so bad it got flooded, the entire world, all but 8 people. So I don't think we're quite that bad. But at other times, God judged Israel because of the world and judged nations around Israel because they were pushing the limits. Sodom and Gomorrah, they pushed the limits of everything, and we say, well, it can't be any worse today. And we say San Francisco is a Sodom and Gomorrah of America. It could be. But the question is, how long will God put up with us? We ask the same question. How long? Now, I said last week, you know, I can be criticized for seeing a comparison between the modern times we're living today and the times that Habakkuk was involved. He says there in verse 4, the law was slack. That means they had laws on the books. They had laws to enforce. They had people to enforce it, but they lost its power. It lost its influence because the people didn't want to put it into effect. It's a lot like what we're experiencing today. You know, used to be you could see, like I said, 1906 Big Pen and give you a record for life. Now you got to do $1,000, $950 for it, even think about it. Walmart, as an instance, is very big on shoplifting, but they won't prosecute it because it's too painful, it doesn't pay. So the changes could be forced by law. And I said to somebody before church started, our Congress can limit any president's power by law. They can make executive decisions, make a law, and the president has to follow it. Problem is, neither party wants to do that to their guy in office, and you get what we have today. Hezekiah was king at the time, and his revival did not last that long. Josiah became the king, and he inherited the idea that the temple was disrepaired, the law was misplaced, the priests were spiritually and morally corrupt. They had their hands out. They were making their money. So what happened to their society that's modern to ours? Well, they redefined sin. And we said, what was a drunkard? It's a disease, alcoholism now. A kleptomaniac, somebody that stole everything, but now we don't call it the misdemeanor. Adultery is a sin, but if you call it affair, it looks a little better, And then the alternative lifestyles. It's they're fighting right now about kindergartners being taught about gender. They can change their gender in kindergarten. That's just wrong. We know it is, but that's where you go to your school board, you stand up, and you fight against it. So what they did was they had this absolute standards they get away with them, and they made everything relative to the time and the place and what happens. And I talked about the relativeness of a pastor telling me one time to raise $15,000, and I said, well, did you go raise $150,000 this Sunday? And he said, well, I had to prepare. I said, well, my church has to prepare for 15, just like you had to prepare for 150. Everything's relative. It depends on where you are and what it is. And they said the wicked compass about the righteous. That is, we are outnumbered in this world. Let's face it, there's more non-Christians than Christians. For a Christian nation, America's founded as we struggle to keep Christian values. So it's no wonder God wanted to judge Israel. They became very permissive. We said they lived among the heathen. They worked their work, or he was going to work a work that they would not believe, which would be grafted into church, the Gentile. And if he told them in a prophecy, they wouldn't have believed him. They mocked him for this. And even when he did do it, they mocked him anyway. Now, what the Jews understand here, and what should we understand about what Habakkuk is talking about? The Jews were as bad as the heathen. So the Jews were as unrighteous as the unrighteous pagan. Heathen was a Greek word we said for the Gentile or pagans. And he's speaking about those that advocated God's authority for idolatry. And Christians have time and time again done that. Churches, conventions, or associates have done that. And the whole point is God's saying to, I have trouble with his name again, Habakkuk, is that man can justify all he wants, his sins. But if God says it's sin, it's sin. It's wrong. It's as simple as that. And God chose the seed of Abraham. God said, I can choose the seed of the Gentile. Now, the Jews with the church and the Christianity still don't, Orthodox Jews, believe God has done this. They think it's wrong. They choose to see. They don't believe the prophecy. But by the same token, there's a lot of Christians, Bible-based Baptist, Bible-based churches that maybe not the Baptist name, but they have Baptist doctrine, Bible doctrine, stand against these conventions, organizations that changed the constitution of the church. They changed the authority of the church. Now, in Babylon, the Jews would conquer idolatry. Now, in verses 7 through 11, it says, they are terrible and dreadful. Their judgment and their dignity shall proceed of themselves. Their horses also are swifter than leopards, but they're pretty fast horses. More fierce than evening wolves. Wolves look for a break. And their horsemen shall spread themselves, and their horsemen shall come from afar, and they shall fly as eagles. that lust hasteth to eat. They shall come from all their violence, cover their sins, shall their faces up in the east wind, and they shall be gathered at the captivity of the sand, as the sand. They shall scoff at the kings and the princes, and scorn them. They shall deride every stronghold, for they shall heap the dust and take it. Then shall his mind change, they shall pass over and offend, imputing his power unto his Lord. Now, I'm going to chase a rabbit here, and it's Jack's fault. Because he come to me last week saying, "My Bible says Chaldeans, and you're talking about Babylonians." Well, technically, they're one and the same at certain periods of history. So who are the Chaldeans? Well, they came from southern Babylonia, which would be southern Iraq. Remember, Saddam Hussein was trying to rebuild Babylon, and he was trying to do what Nebuchadnezzar did, put his name on every brick. Well, he didn't get the job done. The land of the Chaldeans is 400 by 100 miles long, between the Euphrates, and that's what that means. Chaldean means land between the rivers. There are people that came from between the rivers, Tigris and Euphrates. Now, they're mentioned multiple times in the Bible, in Genesis chapter 11 and Genesis chapter 15. Terah is Abraham's dad. Abraham is the man that God is going to choose to begin the Hebrew race, and he pulls him out of where? The Ur of Chaldea. So Abraham, I think he's eighth in line, descendant of Shem. Now, let me give you a little historical thing that I found today. The Chaldeans have come to America. There are Chaldeans today, what we call a minority in Iraq. In the early 1900s, the Ottoman Turks treated them so harsh. Now, they're also called Armenians, Assyrians, Elamites, Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Arabs, and Hebrews. So they're all from the line of Shem, is what I'm saying. These guys, when we say kissing cousins, the Hatfield McCoys, the Arabs and the Jews and the Elamites, they're all the same family. Just don't like each other. There's over 75,000 of them in America. 60,000 Chaldeans are in Detroit. Sterling Heights is a Chaldean community. There's 15,000 in San Diego, and California has several cities that have umpteen Chaldean, Armenian, Assyrian people. There's 80,000 came from Detroit, from Windsor, Ontario, and from Mexico to settle in the D.C. area. And they went to work in the automobile plants, and they opened up family businesses. So it's not so far away that we don't understand this. Now, the Chaldean rite, or religion, is one of the major official rites of the Chaldeans. Is the Eastern Catholic Church, or the East Church, and accepted by Rome, accepts them. And so basically the Chaldeans at one point become believers. Now, the three magi followed the Lord. They were men of the East. Now, they've given them Arab names, but what we know about the Chaldeans is they were great astrologers. And they left almost 40 years worth of information they gained from Daniel, Meshach, Abednego, and the other royal Jews they took to Jerusalem. And they were the three wise men that followed his star, or Chaldeans. So that's right today. Let me see. There's 2 pages of this. There might be something on the second page I want to bring up, but I thought it was interesting anyway. Yeah. Iraq is a present-day home. We know that, the Chaldeans. And I'll give this to Jack when I'm all done, and he can print it. It's written. It's real small print, but it's your fault. Now, Shem was a great-grandson of Eber, who was the progenitor of what is called the Hebrew race. The height of the Chaldean power was the Babylonian Empire. And like I said, they took Daniel, the Hebrew boys, they captured the royal, it took them there, for every people they captured, and they learned from them. They wanted the education from them. And the study of astrology, we already talked about. Now the most likely it was a city, but if maybe not a city, maybe an area, we can't really tell. But it's definitely what we call the Fertile Crescent. So these guys were northwest of the Persian Gulf, about 150 miles, where everything was flush, where everything was watered, and they called it the Fertile Crescent. Now, if you went down to the Rio Grande Valley, there's the Rio Grande Valley, when I lived there, was called the Fertile Crescent, because they grew, believe it or not, they grew more winter produce, crops and stuff, than California. California, though, had an area that was called the Fertile Crescent, and they dammed it all up, and they won't let them farm it. So Texas became that. Well, you get all kinds of crops down there. We even did the gleaning one time. Karen got me to go out and glean, you know. And for me to go out and glean vegetables, I don't even eat. That took a lot. I'll tell you right now. But the point was, they picked the one, they picked the twos, and you could get the threes. Before they plowed it under. A couple of days they plowed under, and you wouldn't glean. But it was a very fertile area. Now, that's who the Chaldeans are with the Babylonians. Now, the sin of the Chaldeans in verse 11, like the Assyrians, like the Babylonians, Assyrian the Babylonians, the true to victories, they always said, our God made your God small. Our God gave us victory. Philistines will even do that. Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar. The first was ruler of Babylon was Nebuchadnezzar. The last was Belshazzar. Of course, what was he known for? The handwriting on the wall. The hand shot up and says, meeny, Urkel, you farson, you've been found weighed and counted. And they dammed up the river and walked right into the city while they were partying. So Babylon had been told who the real God was. I mean, Nebuchadnezzar, and maybe this was some of our leaders see today. Maybe they need to go out and eat like a goat. You know, he went out and ate in the fields. God made him like an animal and then brought him back, but he was very happy to be brought back to normal. In verse 12, Habakkuk made the same type of statements again. He rephrases it. How long will God restrain his judgment? How long will you wait? And we ask that a lot today. We say, well, we know God's going to return. We know his return is imminent. The world can only get so bad, but it seems like it's not as bad as we think, because God is still using it. He's still waiting to judge it. How long will God tolerate the pain and persecution of his people? Just the abortion of babies alone would make most of us say, we're coming back. Yet God said they belong to him. So keep it in mind. They're not lost in that sense. They belong to God, but they're lost to us. He grappled with God's reasoning. Why does God allow things to happen? Why not? I mean, it's beyond me why he lets abortion continue, lets a government be corrupt as they want to be, persecute people, put them in slavery and bondage, the Uyghurs, and all these. Stuff's still happening in this world, and it just amazes me that God hasn't got tired of it. But he's got a plan. The Chaldeans were worse than the Jews. You know, Chinese are worse than Americans, true Americans. A Muslim is worse than a Christian. They don't value the life the way the Christians value life. But then pagan history, pagan world, doesn't value life either. The Jews could justify anything they wanted, but that doesn't always mean God was going to accept it. So we can justify, we can redefine, rephrase all we want, but that doesn't mean God's going to turn a blind eye to it. Now, he deals with two things now, and that's the person of God and the purpose of God. The person of God. Now, this is something that he had to deal with, the prophet had to deal with, that we do. God is different from man. Now, um, hospice care for Poochie. Uh, Dina went in hospice care. The Simpsons went in. We do that because we die. God's eternal. He doesn't have death. God's different from man, then God is holy. Man fights to be holy. Man fights to be separated. Man fights to serve by faith. Man fights his will of the flesh, the three parts of the flesh, the pride of life, the lust of the flesh, and the, I forget the third one is in 1 John. But we fight those temptations all the time. God doesn't fight that. God is always holy. He's always right. You know, my dad had that, I never told my dad to sit at the dinner table. It's funny how people sit at the dinner table. My dad sat at the head. I was the oldest kid, so I sat at the other end of the table. And then my mom, and then my sister, and then my brothers. And we'd have discussions. But one thing I learned, if my dad was right, I don't care whether I was right or not, I believe he was right. He's in charge. He's the head of it. He grew the family. He grew up. He already been through all these things. We have all these crazy ideas. You know, I can remember going to him one time and saying, I'm going to live with Wally Sarton in this trailer house, and we're going to milk, I don't know, 200 or 300 head of cattle, then go to school. And he said, you don't even know which end of the cattle milk. And I gave him some thought, and then he said, don't bring your laundry home. Don't come home for dinner. Don't come home for any meals. Don't ask you to borrow any money. Nothing. If you leave on your own. Don't let the door hit you in the butt. And I thought about it, and I thought, you know, my mom did the laundry. She did a pretty good cook, you know. I had clean clothes. I went to school. I think I'll just stay home. He was right. I was wrong. Even if I thought I could do it, he was trying to make the point that he'd been there. God is different from man in that God's not limited. What happens to God happens right now doesn't limit him. We're involved in this thing in Afghanistan. It will pass eventually. It will one way or the other be resolved. We're going to be limited. We're going to be hampered. We're going to have problems from it as a man. But God doesn't have a problem with it. God's in charge of it. It doesn't limit God at all. He couldn't understand how a holy God could allow Chaldeans to persecute God's own people. Now, I can't understand. I honestly cannot understand how a government can oppose its people and Christian values. I don't understand that. Yet I live around it all the time. You know, they oppose everything that we do. Abortion is number one. The adultery, homosexuality, alternate lifestyles, gender blending, all this stuff is anti-biblical, yet they survive. Why did God put these people in office? Why do these people have to persecute us just wanting to do right? But that's what he's asking. Now, the purpose of God. The purpose of God is the fact that God made a covenant with Israel. Israel knew that they were going to make it until the end, one way or another, because God made the covenant. Israel didn't make the covenant. God made the covenant with Israel. Now, go to Hebrews, and what does it say we have today? We have a better covenant. Why do we have a better covenant? Well, number one, we're not obligated to the law. It's by faith. It's by grace. It gives us a reward called heaven. Gets their name written down in the Lamb's Book of Life. The Jews weren't promised that with their covenant. They had to live under the law. The law had to teach them that God was going to what? One day graft in the church, and all men must be saved. Nobody had an advantage. It's a better covenant. I'd rather live under grace any day than the law. I don't like some of the laws on the books now, you know, but if I get pulled over, I got to live with it. You know, years ago, I got pulled over in Corsicana, Texas, with Louisiana plates on I-45, and there was nobody even around me. And I look in my mirror, and there's this cop, and he pulled me over, Texas trooper. And he said, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" I thought, well, no seatbelt. No. Talking on my cell phone. No. Speeding. No. Then I felt like saying, what in the world did I do? And he said, I stayed in the passing lane too long. There was nobody in the road but me. He said, I'm just going to give you a warning. I didn't like all those laws, but I knew I violated them immediately, all three of them, because I was in a hurry to get home. I was about 12 hours away. I told my friend in Texas, you ain't going to believe what happened. He goes, you know what? It was your Louisiana plates. They hate Louisiana and Texas. And to prove it, I used to go into the restaurant on the state line, and I leave tracks. As to how to get to heaven from Louisiana, and I leave them in Texas. And we used to think it was funny. We walk out and look back, and those Texans were tearing that table up, trying to figure out what in the world is this guy doing, leaving Louisiana tracks. Now imagine we could do it with Ohio too, but Ohio and Michigan don't seem to be quite the rivalries as football. But Texas, it is. So we have a better covenant. And God is faithful. We understand that. And God's dealings are corrective and punitive. In other words, when God brings something to our trial, tribulation, or life, it's for discipline purposes. That's what it's about. Now, Habakkuk makes an unusual request in verse 12. Thou art not from everlasting, O Lord my God, the Holy One. We shall not die. O Lord, thou art ordained from the hundermost, and Almighty God. Now, Almighty God, brought it down into Hebrew, it means, Almighty God means a rock. Now, the rock was a symbol of God to the Jews from the wilderness wandering on. Nothing could change God's purpose or God's person. That's what he's saying to him there. He's saying that he's answering his own question in the end, that God's sovereign, God does what he wants. We don't change God. God doesn't change when we plead something to him. He doesn't change his law. He doesn't change his convictions. He doesn't change his grace. He doesn't change his mercy. He's the same all the time. And that's what we really need. We need something that's steady and always the same. Man likes to play with it. And we get involved, and it's always sin. And if we say to God, why must we? Because God said so. Now, growing up, there was times when I say to my dad say, I want you to do this. Why? Because I said so. That meant he didn't have a reason either. His dad had told him, you do it. It's good. It was right. You just do it. God said, no, you just do this, and I'll bless. Now, in verse 13 through 17, Habakkuk tried to rephrase the questions again. So it's the third time. Don't you get irritated when somebody constantly asks you the same thing over and over and over? So you can understand why Biden don't want questions, or you can understand why Peter Ducey or anybody else in Jen Psaki, they don't like being questioned 3 or 4 times, because they're not telling us straight the answer, so they keep rephrasing the question. But God tells us straight, but he keeps rephrasing the question. And we know he understood. He just told it. We understood for the person, he understood the purpose. But he still could come to grips with how God would take a treacherous people to judge, correct, punitively discipline God's holy people. It didn't make sense to him. It doesn't make sense to us sometimes when we look at the world. Now, Habakkuk describes the character of the Chaldeans in verses 14 through 17. And he also talked about their horses, how swift they were. They were like leopards. Leopards can outrun a lot of things. More fierce than evening wolves. You know, the wolves don't like to come out in the daytime. They come out at night, and they're hungry and they're fierce. They're like these wolves. And their horsemen shall come from afar. They shall fly like eagles. They'll be fast. But then he gets down here in 14 through 17, and I'll mark us men as a fish of the sea. He said, they're going to mark you like the fish of the sea. There's a couple ways to fish. Now, where I grew up, at the Indian River Inlet, the bridge fell in, one half of it. The other half, they let us use as a fishing pier. I think they only took it down like 10 years ago. Uh, I never liked fishing. First off, I want to see what I'm looking for, and most water you cannot see in it. But every once in a while, we'd be down there, and one flounder would come up on the top of the water, and all 700 fish rods, or what probably was 100. Everybody would cast after that one flounder. This idea of dropping it to the bottom of the ocean with a weight on it, waiting for someone to come on and nibble it, this is not my idea of fun. That's called fishing. Now, when my brother-in-law took me down there one night, we went night fishing. And I'd been down there, but I'd never been night fishing. And I knew enough that the eels were not something you didn't mess with. If the eel got a hold of you, it could cut you up. We caught an eel in the dark. I had the lantern. He had the fishing rod. He had the eel. And he said, "Oh, no, it's an eel." And I was gone. Me and the light were like miles down the road. And he's going, "Come back. I can't see the eel. I can't see the eel." I said, I didn't care. I wanted to get rid of that eel. It's a water snake, basically. So we fished for that. But then they have what's seining. You know, Texas, Louisiana, they could seine certain seasons and certain fish, which throw a net in, they'd be spawning, you catch them and bring them out. They do that with a lot of times with lobster and stuff. They use nets. And they have to go through there and pick out what is not too young for it and stuff. They took war like they threw a net over you, fishing. And somebody was telling me this, it was you, though, he was telling me about the guy came up, it was you, the guy came up with the idea of shooting a net this way in Africa, and the net would fall out and capture all the monkeys. That's basically what we're talking about. They drop the nets. It seems like they drop nets on people and corral them. Like fish, they could care the least. And they didn't have any rules like we have, today. 9 inches, 10 inches, you can throw it back. They just collected them. They didn't care. And their cruelty was they just kill them all. Let them die. So Habakkuk is perplexed. 3 times he asked God, "Why would you use the Chaldeans?" Now, the Chaldeans weren't even officially in power yet. They were just starting to feel their oaths. And like I said, they were a small southern area of Mesopotamia, the Fertile Crescent, 400 miles long by 100. Texas, when I lived here one time, if you went from, I'm trying to think how it worked, around Shreveport all the way to Abilene, you went 826 miles. 800 miles and you never left Texas. And then you could go from Wichita Falls to the Rio Grande Valley, and that was 15 hours. My dad one time said, "How much gas does it cost you to go from McAllen to Houston or to San Antonio? What's the cost?" I said, "I don't know. It's just 3 tanks of gas in my Chrysler LeBaron." That's how I measured it. As long as I can fill it 3 times, I can make it. It's perplexing to us. I said to Richard Boone one time, we were going to Abilene from his house in Tyler, which is maybe 60 miles from Shreveport, state line. So we're going 800 miles. Springfield was only 700 miles north. And I said, I was driving him, and I said, "Richard, would you go to Springfield for a Monday night and a Tuesday morning meeting? Will we drive all the way up there just to go for a couple hours on Monday night and 3 hours on Tuesday morning and then drive home?" He said, "No." I said, "Well, we have now gone farther than that, getting to Abilene. We haven't left Texas." That's perplexing. He said, "Shut up and drive." It's his car and his gas. And that's true. So the prophet is honestly perplexed, like we would be today. Why would God use such a violent, cruel, mean people that treated the other people they fought against like just common fish in the sea? Cast net over them, throw them out on the ground, and let them die. Why would God choose those kinds of people? Back is just 3 chapters, but I'm telling you, it's a different prophet, a different reasoning, and when I read it and start studying it, it's just so much It's like a modern world we live in. That's all there is to it. Brother Jack can come up, and I'll leave your Chaldean thing up here. If anybody else wants it, there it is. He'd make you copies, or I can. There's a lot more. I just gave you the top stuff.
Last week, when he kept mentioning Chaldeans and it said Babylonians and so forth, it was confusing to me. So it's interesting to hear because the Chaldean, I have a Chaldean doctor, and we had an Armenian jeweler that we dealt with for 35 years. So, you got one piece of the news from Pastor about Poochie, that she did come home last night and then had to be taken by ambulance back to the hospital today. So she's going to be there for at least another day, and then they're looking for a hospice care facility. Oh, okay. Okay, and where is the facility? Linden? Oh, okay. Caretel out there? Okay. There's because Caretel's out there that we know of. So. So Poochie will be moving out there tomorrow. Patty came home yesterday, Grant? Yesterday, and she's going to have therapy at home, but it's still kind of tough because she still has to go to dialysis. And Grant said that was a interesting procedure today. Just to say, said. She can't stand up. So it's real difficult for her. Karen, the MRI, what's the latest? It's going to be a couple months before she can get it. Takes a while because there's only a couple places in Michigan that will do it for someone that has a pacemaker. Joan, the Bill Horn they had the funeral last week, and so we still need to pray for the family. And Joan seemed to be in good spirits because it was Bill was getting pretty bad with these other issues, and then the cancer coming, that would have been really tough. At least she said that he's no longer in pain; he's not suffering. But it's still going to be tough. Anyone that loses a spouse or has lost one, until it happens, they don't understand what it's like. Debbie Desmond, boss, has COVID. Kenny Martin from Grant, Operation Aggressive Brain Cancer. Heard anything on that one, Grant? Okay. And we've got quite a few on there that we have talked about in the past. Has anybody got any updates that they want to share with us? How about me? Okay. Went to the doctor yesterday, and what all the reports came, there was good news, bad news, but it all boils down to the fact that I have, what do they call it, Joni? I know, but I I get AFib that comes and goes, and you don't know when. So they put me on a baby aspirin and a low dose medication for AFib. And then in about 2 weeks, they're going to go in and put a loop monitor in my chest. And it's not, the doctor says, no, Jack, that is not in your chest. It's under your skin on your chest. Get it right. And but I have to go to the hospital. That's how they do the procedure. All they do is cut the skin. They inject it. It's about 1.25 inches long, and sounds like about the size of a pencil lead. And it's good for up to 5 years. And then they'll see if they catch anything else. So it's like wearing a Holter monitor 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for up to 5 years. And every night they'll give me a little radio transponder, and at night it sends the information back. And from what he said the first time, there's also a button on it or something that I can push to send to say that there is something happening. But we'll find out more on the 9th when I go to have it put in. And then what they do is they make a little incision, they inject it in underneath the skin, they put in like 1 stitch, and then they put super glue, the human super glue on it, and I can go about normal life other than getting it wet for a couple of weeks. So a friend of ours, Kathy, the one that's on here, when she's had her surgeries and when she's had to have all the different things put on, what they had her do was take cling wrap and put that over top of it so you can take a shower and stuff like that. Yep, and it just covers that up. And so, because when I had the broken ankle and had a cast on, I just took great big bags and put them over there and taped that sucker on. There's always a way. Got to have a shower. Got to have a shower. Have one of those things every day. And Nancy with her feet issues, and Pat with her leg issues, and Cleon with his post-procedure issues that he's had. Oh, we've got a lot of things that we need to pray for besides the country, the missionaries, our leaders, but just within our church. We need to pray for each other. We need to try and we keep talking about Patty, but we also got to make sure that we pray for Grant, because anybody that's been a caregiver knows how tough that can be, day in and day out. You're there, and when the other person is unable to do very much, and Joni's had to be a caregiver, and when issues would come up with me, like the vertigo. When you have that and you're totally incapacitated, you can't even get up out of bed at night for anything. Got to have help. And I tell you what, that was one of the toughest things for me, is to have to wake my wife up to help me get up. Now, to wake somebody up for me was an awful thing to do. So we definitely have to pray for people like Grant and anybody else that's out there helping other people. Has anybody else got anything? Have we got any praises? I still think it's a praise that Patty did get home, even though that there's a lot of work there. She has had enough improvement that she's able to come home, and we've got a lot of things like that. Every morning, I just thank the Lord that He lets me be able to get up, get out of bed, put my feet on the floor and be able to move. Look around each and every one of us, the people that we see or we know that somebody else has to feed them, somebody else has to change their clothes for them, somebody else has to do everything for them. We're blessed every day. Every one of us are. It doesn't matter how much pain we've got. We're blessed that we can get up. We can do things. Anybody else on anything that we have? Right, right. Okay, we've got, if for the people out there, if you get a chance, come this coming Sunday. We're going to have our 5th Sunday dinner, and come and join us, because after we have service on Sunday, we'll have great fellowship, wonderful food. Just ask Louis. Louis says he does like to eat, and all of us do too. And everybody is a good cook, it seems, on one special thing or another, if not a lot of things, but they always bring something special. So please come and join us. We'll have a good time. We'll have fellowship, and there will not be an evening service, so don't try and come that evening, because we will not have service that evening. And if you haven't had a chance, try and come back. If not then, shortly thereafter. We miss seeing everybody and would love to have you come and join us. So let's go to the Lord in prayer. Heavenly Father, we are so grateful to come to you. As we mentioned, we are so thankful and grateful that people were able to get out of the hospital and be able to come home. They each still have issues, but they have improved immensely. So we thank you that they're able to be there. Please give the strength to the caregivers and keep them healthy. Be with each one of our members that have had other issues, like Pat Williams and Cleon and Bob and Joy McKay. They need our prayers. We love being able to have each and every one of them with us. Please bring each back to health so they can be with us, and we'll be able to tell them ourselves how much we've missed them. We ask that you be with the missionaries out there that are preaching Christ first. Please keep them and our military safe and healthy, and please help bring back all of the Americans out of Afghanistan and the people that help them. Keep them safe no matter what is happening around the world. Please keep them healthy and bring them back home to their loved ones. In Jesus' precious name, amen. Oh, and both of the doctor and the jeweler are both Christians. They're Christians. They're not. I was shocked when I found out where they were from and everything. That